Libya sliding into chaos. A number of people have been killed in renewed factional fighting, forcing diplomats and other foreigners to leave the country. Tension on the ground is made worse by a shaky political situation. So who is to blame? Has the international community failed the Libyans? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. It's been almost 3 years since US President Barack Obama hailed what he described as a new era of promise in Libya, a remark that now seems short-sighted. For weeks, rival militias have exchanged rocket and artillery fire. In the past 2 weeks alone, fighting has killed more than 150 people in Tripoli and Benghazi. And in the absence of security, kidnappings have become commonplace. Electric power is scarce and internet almost non-existent. The situation has now become so dangerous that foreign diplomats have left the country. A British embassy convoy came under attack as it was trying to flee to the border. And there were chaotic scenes in Tripoli's Mitiga airport on Sunday as many scrambled to leave Libya after being told they should evacuate. The fighting is part of a wider struggle between a rogue general called Khalifa Haftar and his political opponents, Islamic forces in Libya. Since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan political scene has been dominated by Islamic-orientated politicians. But failures in government and a feeling that Islamic politicians acted to serve their own narrow interests has made them increasingly unpopular. Haftar used that sentiment to gather support for an offensive against his rivals. In May, he launched attacks in Benghazi and overran the parliament in Tripoli. An alliance of Islamic fighters and militias from Misrata are now fighting back. In the past few weeks, that fight has focused on Tripoli's airport, which is controlled by the Zintan militia, allies of Khalifa Haftar. For more on this, let's bring in our guests. In London, Jason Pack, president of LibyaAnalysis.com and a researcher at Cambridge University. In Washington, D.C., Karim Mirzan, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Rafiq Hariri Center for the Middle East. And also in London, Richard Northern, former British ambassador to Libya and director of RN4 Consultancy. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Jason Pack. We've seen violence in the east of Libya. At the moment, very intense violence in the west. It seems to be very much a national conflict at the present.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. Another is that Libya is divided into two military theaters, an eastern and a western theater, which are entirely separate but interact with each other. The current violence that's going on around the airport is the Misratan and Islamist bloc responding to successes of the anti-Islamist bloc in the east. So it appears that Khalifa Haftar has become dominant in the east of Libya, and politically now we've seen the House of Representatives election on June 25th of this year brought in a very strong and overwhelming anti-Islamist majority into the new parliament. So now the Islamists are afraid of being pushed out militarily in the east and pushed out politically in the west and the rest of the country. So they've resorted to arms in the area, the western theater, in which they have a superiority numerically and in training and armaments. However, that superiority is not strong enough to win, and we see a kind of stalemate in the battle over the airport.
Well, Karim Mirzan, do you see something like the isolated incident as it is at the airport, the fight going on there, as a reflection of a broader struggle that is going on between various factions and groups in the country as a whole?
It definitely is. I agree with Jason. It's two separate theaters, but they are highly interconnected. The news from the east is that also there the Islamists are fighting back, and many soldiers have been killed in the last 2 days. And Khalifa Haftar has not been able to conquer Benghazi and still sits at the Marja 60 miles away from the south. It's the southern part of Libya, there are clashes already signaled over there. And the western part is a stalemate for which we don't see the end. So all over the nation there are continuous clashes and battles. It's not still a hurting stalemate, and that's the problem. Both sides think they can win. Both sides are putting more weapons and more resources into it, and the situation in Tripoli is becoming extremely difficult for the population. The huge fire has been started by a missile hitting the oil reserves near the airport, and it took the firefighters a whole day to stop it. And so you can imagine the fear of the population. You can imagine the status of the lack of water, the lack of electricity that is bringing on the population. There is a fear, and a lot of people are trying to evacuate. We are not seeing yet the scenes of desperation that we see in Iraq or in Gaza, but soon if it does not put an end to this attack, we are going to see a humanitarian crisis in Libya as well.
Well, Richard Northern, is the term civil war looming in Libya's future?
Well, certainly the political transition process that was outlined by the political leadership in 2011 now seems to have come to an end, to have fallen apart. And the clashes, the differences between the various blocs, the allied militia, have now, which have been simmering for some time, now come out into the open, into military clashes. It's not easy to see a clear victor either in the east or the west. I agree with the others that they're two separate but linked theatres. I can see no military solution in either theatre. It's difficult to see one side prevailing convincingly. There will need to be a mediated solution eventually and a return to the political theatre.
Well, Jason Pack, we've heard the name Khalifa Haftar a number of times now. Now, he started that campaign in the east, but to what extent was that a campaign against extremist Islamic fighters, that he said it was, and to what extent was it the beginning of a fight against the central government at that particular time?
Well, you've hit on some interesting themes there. One of the key points in Libyan politics since the ouster of Gaddafi in late 2011 has been a struggle between the center and the periphery. Central government has become so weak that peripheral militias are able to not only outnumber it and defeat it militarily, but provide governance functions. It's militias that control ministries. It's militias that run smuggling networks. It's militias that are connected to local councils who also operate schools and things like this. I want to amplify Richard's very important point, which is that what we've seen since 2011 is a moment of hope where all these factions fought together against Gaddafi, i.e. Islamist factions and more nationalist and more liberal factions, East and West, all fighting together. And then we've seen them try to contest power amongst themselves. That was initially a political context through electoral and other mechanisms, which could be loosely called the transition process. Now, no group wants to lose in the transition process, so there's a scramble for power. And what had been a political scramble, and it's deteriorated and become uglier over the past months, has now broken out into a military scramble for control of Tripoli. And sadly, as each side thinks it can win, they are mistaken. None of the militias are strong enough to gain control. Neither the Islamist or the anti-Islamist bloc can defeat the other. And they're going to have a sit-down, probably via international mediation. Otherwise, the transition process will be fully lost, and there won't be an agreed-upon framework of where Libya is heading.
Karim Mesrin, there is a danger here that we are separating what is happening on the ground between the militia from the politicians sitting in Tripoli, yet many of those politicians who were part of the past government, who were part of the General National Congress, have themselves militia followers and are directing, to an extent, militia operations, is it not?
Yes, there is a strict connection between the political and the armed groups. In fact, Jason is right. There has to be a mediation which has to be taken on the political level. If that mediation is undertaken, it will be solved also at the level of the militias. The real problem is now, in this moment of crisis, how to obtain the withdrawal of all militias from the battlefield, from Tripoli, and the giving up of heavy weapons and the return of security to the two cities. That is a pivotal point. Unless there is some sort of security for the citizenship and the return to normal lives in terms of services, there is no space for a political settlement or a political negotiation. That's why we have been advocating a stronger intervention of the international community, even with the threat of the use of military force, in order to obtain the withdrawal of the militias from the city and the ceasefire, which can be obtained only through a strong intervention from the West. And it will not happen, I think at least it will not happen naturally on the ground, because one of the purposes of the attack is exactly that of suspending the democratic process, the transition process, in order to force the other part to a negotiated solution, which will never come unless it's fostered by an external actor.
Well, Richard Northern, the problem is about that issue of mediation is that many diplomats are now leaving the country because of the violence, are they not?
They are, but a number of organisations, the United Nations and the various envoys appointed by leading Western nations, have been active in trying to open the door to negotiation, to mediation, and have been urging the parties to adopt that path. That is an iterative process. That's not making much headway at the moment, but the time will come when the parties on the ground exhaust the other options and find that that is the only way forward. So it's worth persevering. There's been no early breakthrough, but eventually that will be the route to resolving the dispute and creating a way forward.
Well, let's just take a pause here and take a look at the current political situation. Even before this round of violence, Libya had been facing a political crisis. The nation has failed to build strong institutions in the years following the fall of Gaddafi. It's gone through 5 different governments to 2011, all dominated by politicians largely with an Islamic agenda. But each of them has failed to build a unified army and a police that can give Libyans security. And as a consequence, the once powerful Islamic groups saw heavy losses in the most recent and controversial parliamentary election in June. Well, let's go to Karim Mesran. Is there a political solution to all of this, and how does one get there? Is it only through mediation, do you believe?
Yes, it has to be. The problem is we have to solve the situation on the ground now, which has been military carried. The truce can only be achieved if the two sides negotiate a solution or a series of guarantees. Negotiation to form to allow the assembly to meet, negotiations to form a national unity government that in a sort of sense guarantees all sides about their rights. Because let's face it, the problem here is the fear of the Islamists that the same thing that has happened in Egypt and to a certain extent in Tunisia will apply to Libya. The fact that a lot of the forces sided with Haftar, when Haftar loomed all the Islamists together and targeted them as enemies, sent them a very chilling alarm signal that there is not going to be a mediation unless they resort to weapons and defend themselves. This has to be resolved through a negotiated settlement where the non-Islamists allows the Islamists some guarantees, some security, some certainty about their future, that they will not be targeted, they will not be massacred, they will not be pushed aside of the realm. And I'm talking about those moderate Islamists. I'm not referring to the radicals who should be marginalized no matter what. But the moderates and the radicals have been assembled and put together and forced to coexist precisely by the actions of Haftar and the other forces. So there is definitely a political solution, but it has to come to a negotiated term first. And then once the transition is reinstated and the parliament is worked and the new government is elected and stuff, then it might continue only on the political level. But this is a crisis moment and the dramatic moment that should be addressed through a national unity sort of dialogue and behavior.
Jason Peck, you had a point to make there?
Yeah, I want to amplify what Karim has said. He's hit the nail on the head. It's too late, and a national unity government should have been forthcoming earlier. Libyans have a shared narrative of their struggle against oppression. They have a hope to use the oil wealth and vast human capital of their country to move forward and modernize. It's been a tragedy that first the NTC and then the GNC has seen this competition between the 2 or 3 different political blocs. It's taken a crisis like this to show that no one can win. Neither the Misratans or the Zintanis can defeat each other militarily. The only solution left is a grand bargain. And that compromise is going to take sacrifice. Not everyone is going to get all the legislation that they want or everything for their region. You know, many Cyrenaians feel that they need more wealth and that they didn't get enough of the oil wealth in Gaddafi's time. Not everyone is going to get exactly what they want, but the mainstream political factions, 60% as it were, have to come together and say, we care more about Libya than our peculiar specific interests, and we're willing to make these compromises to forge something. Sadly, until now, there isn't a leader figure who can do that. Khalifa Haftar is not that figure. Mahmoud Jibril has become stigmatized. Many of the Muslim Brotherhood figures are also stigmatized. Hopefully a grand bargain can emerge, these guys sitting around the table saying, I will actually sacrifice this so that my children can have electricity and we're not going to be killing each other. And I think the Libyan people want that, and we're not going to see a further descent into civil war.
Well, Richard Northern, your view on that, is there rationality, is there potential for rationality among political leaders?
I agree with Jason that there are hopeful signs. The GNC, which by the time it reached the end of its tenure was rather discredited and had become just a forum for squabbling between the entrenched political blocs, and people were frustrated that it was ignoring the interests of the state and of the wider population, has now come to the end of its tenure and is being replaced, we hope, by the newly elected House of Representatives in a week or so's time. If that process all goes smoothly, that's a very good sign, because the indications are that the House, which has been elected, individuals have been elected to sit there in their own right, not as representatives of political blocs or parties, that they may be able to put the interests of the state, of the country, above the interests of their narrow city or local loyalties. And that's one hopeful sign for the future. That may turn into an effective forum, and we have to hope that it will. That may gain more political respect and authority for the institutions of the state. Then we have to build the other institutions, the civil administration and the police and the army, around that functioning government. That at least provides a focus. At the moment, we've had a situation over the last 6 to 12 months where the legislature, the GNC, has been at loggerheads with the government, with executive authority, and they've been blocking each other, ensuring that there was no practical progress in any area.
Well, the start point, though, in all of that, Karam Mesrin, would appear to be that House of Representatives that was mentioned, that has just been elected into place in, one must remark, a very low percentage poll, and already there has been strong resistance to the composition of that House of Representatives. Do you think that the scenario that Richard Northern outlined there, using that as the fulcrum to move the country forward and then to begin longer-term nation building, is that a viable fulcrum, the House of Representatives, as it is at the moment?
I agree, it is, and there is no alternative. It's not possible now to, like some Islamists said, that they should call for new elections or change the whole roadmap for the transition right now. We have an elected assembly. This elected assembly should be allowed to meet, and around that meeting, but let's be precise. There has to be a grand bargain, as Jason was talking about before all of this. A grand bargain where all forces agree that that is the transition process that should be undertaken, and they agree that they have to support the working of this assembly through a certain number of guarantees for each side regarding future legislation and other stuff. And then around what's going on, the new assembly should be allowed to work. And that's the only legitimate institution we have, even if it has been elected by a minority of the people. Still, it is the elected organ and should be allowed to work. And once it starts around this, it could be definitely the fulcrum of a process to progress. They should appoint a president of the republic. They should appoint a new government and restart the economy and so on and so on. But all of this will happen only if there is a grand bargain between all the other forces. Otherwise, it will not work.
Jason Pack, does the outside forces, the West, have a responsibility in terms of this, in terms of offering a mediation to create that grand bargain, that grand alliance that we are talking about?
I think they do. And it's important to not waste this opportunity, because if we adopt the mantra of no victor, no vanquished, we can get to the bottom of things. What's happened in the GNC period is that the anti-Islamists have tried to defeat, outmaneuver the Islamists, and now the Islamists are trying to conquer Tripoli. Outside mediators can say, we're not going to support one side over another. We're going to be neutral and credible as much as they can be, and try to sketch out a solution where everyone wins, even if they don't meet all their demands. I believe Jonathan Powell's mission, and he's Britain's special envoy to Libya, is uniquely poised because Britain can connect with its transatlantic relationships and then connections to Gulf countries and Turkey and other regional powers, plus a strong commitment that David Cameron has to Libya, to be a neutral mediator and bring together sides that now already tribal mediation has tried and failed. Local councils have tried to work together and failed. The Libyan tradition is very rich with mediation possibilities. All those have been exhausted. The West, because it intervened in 2011, has a duty to the Libyan people to not abandon them at this key moment. And I was therefore slightly disappointed that the Americans withdrew their embassy in such haste and Saigon-esque, leaving in helicopters. And I think that the British approach has been a little more robust, to withdraw all but essential personnel, but leaving essential personnel so that there can be connections still on the ground, and there can be a way to connect between the sides and do mediation. And not only Western countries are relevant here, Jordan, Morocco, Arab countries who have a knowledge of the cultural situation can play a key role as peacekeepers potentially, and certainly as interested and neutral mediators.
Richard Northern, where do you think the neutral mediators should be coming from?
I agree that a number of countries have a close interest in mediation, in trying to calm the situation down and working towards brokering some sort of agreement between the parties. Certainly Jonathan Powell, as the British envoy and the British government initiative, is working hard, and I believe that's a productive path. It won't produce results overnight. It's a process of building trust and brokering a solution over time. But that's a very productive path to follow. I think all of Libya's neighbours have a close interest in seeing a more stable Libya, politically, economically, and from a security point of view. They will be watching closely and encouraging Libyans to move in that direction, and other regional actors. I agree with Jason that finding a really neutral force that could help if peacekeeping or mediation is needed on the ground. The Jordanians spring to mind, but there may be others. Will be quite difficult, but quite important when the time comes.
Karim Ezran, what sort of body, what country, what force would you like to see acting as mediators to bring these warring parties together?
Well, all the foreign envoys should work together under the sponsorship of the United Nations in order to create a mediating effort. But the military threat and the stick should come from Western countries. As they did in 2011, the NATO countries intervened to prevent the massacre of civilians. The same thing should happen now. Forces from Air Force or Navy Force, I don't mean troops on the ground, from the European countries and the United States should make sure that the militias leave and withdraw from the cities and go back to their own barracks. That's an essential threat that could come, and the respect militarily that these forces have will allow maybe to obtain the result without having really to intervene. And then, yes, of course, once this happens, a peacekeeping force will be done by neutral countries, whatever that means. It can be Moroccan troops, it can be Pakistani, it can be whatever. That remains to be seen. But there will be United Nations troops in charge to maintain and keep the security of the vital installations and keep the security of the cities of Tripoli, while foreign mediators and the various Libyan parts negotiate a solution to the thing. It has to be coordinated. But the moment of the stick, the moment of telling the militias, there is a consequence in massacring people. There is a consequence in destroying a city. There is a consequence in destroying the airport. There is a consequence in doing whatever you're doing. Has to come from those who have the credibility to do this, and these are the United States and the European countries.
Well, at that particular point, my thanks to our guests, Jason Pack, Karim Mesran and Richard Northern. You can also leave your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or go to @AJ Inside Story on Twitter. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching and goodbye for now.